Well, a very good morning to everyone. We hope you're excited about another Animals Part 3
Good
Dream
morning.
Element series. Welcome, and we're glad to be back with you. It's a bit different today because we're recording, it's a pre recorded session because we're busy traveling back from the other end of the UK. And so it's not to miss another session. We thought we'd do a lovely pre-recorded session for you.
So we will miss seeing your comments live, like because we can't see them right now, but we will be following the comments that you post. So if you have any questions or any comments at any point during uh, the stream, please just pop them in, and we will see them, and we will make every effort to respond to you.
Well, Dream Elements series part 3 of animals. Because we had so much stuff to cover, and there, I mean, obviously there's so many animals. We thought we would finish because there are some really interesting animals we didn't cover in session 1 or session 2. So hopefully we'll be able to finish this time and put the animals to bed once and for all.
That sounds like a children's story, doesn't it?
Put the animals to bed. Right, so let's just go over the principles very quickly of understanding animals. And if you have context is very important. And if you have a dream about an animal, then there's obviously a context to that dream, and that really is quite important. So, principles of understanding animals, are they a clean or unclean animal? In the Bible, in Jewish history, clean animals had certain characteristics. Obviously, they were kosher or non-kosher animals. So is the animal kosher or unkosher? For example, a reptile obviously would not be a clean animal, neither would a rat or any kind of bottom feeder, any fish bottom feeders. We had a very strict rules of what we could eat when I was Jewish. And so is an animal clean or is it unclean? It has certain characteristics. So
Let me take on.
yes.
So you can also think about where is the animal in the ecosystem, or what is its defining characteristic. A good example is a whale. A whale is the biggest animal that we know of on Earth. So it represents size, something enormous. A shark. Sharks are often defined by their jaws, right? So it's a lot of it's about teeth. This is something that can clearly bite, and could cut you in half. It could swallow you whole. It's quite a dangerous thing, right? You wanted to add something there?
Oh, a whale and an elephant, both big issues. But
Oh,
we will talk about elephants.
yes, but and then you would have to say this is often another way to think about animals is if you see an animal that's a water-based animal, then you can also think about, well, if there is a land-based animal which is a kind of an equivalent to it, then does that help me understand what this might mean? So just as an elephant is the largest land mammal, a whale is the largest underwater animal. We had one of your dreams from a few years ago where I was puzzling for ages, where there was a seal. And one of the ways I tried to think about it was, if you look at the face of a seal, it does look a bit like a dog. A seal is like it's like an underwater dog. And so that's another way that you can think about
Actually,
animals.
the Afrikaans word I think for a seal is a dog.
Sea haunt or something,
Seehond.
like a sea hound, wasn't it?
So that's all very interesting. And then like a long tail, we spoke about snakes, and they have a very long tail, which is a lie, a very long story. So often if you dream about a snake, you're dreaming about a lie. What about
So,
yes.
yeah, like I just wanted to mention this one because we talked about it in the last session. A black panther. Well, what about a panther? A panther is a powerful predator, like very powerful predator, and very dangerous. And so it often, especially like a black panther, would represent something like a very negative, powerful enemy spirit. But they also hunt from trees. They can stay up in trees, and they can hunt from trees. So it's a powerful spirit that can work through leadership in some form or another. So these are all good ways to think about animals.
What about cultural associations, like the elephant in the room? It's that big issue that nobody wants to talk about. I'll talk a bit about later about somebody who'd had a dream about an elephant in a room. And it was quite an interesting dream, actually. And there was actually a spiritual or a cultural connotation and association to it. A snake in the grass.
Snake in the grass.
Sly as a fox.
Yeah.
Getting squirrely.
Yeah, like in an agitated state, because squirrels are always running around anxious about getting their provision in for winter. So all of those are kind of cultural associations that we have with animals.
And the significance of?
Just before we go on to colours, I just wanted to add another one that's not on the list here, and that's consider word plays with animals as well. That's a bit like, slightly like, say, the elephant in the room, but one of the meanings of a seal could be as in a seal, like it is sealed. Something has been sealed. So again, think about word plays when it comes to animals. You were going to come on to colours, right?
Yes.
Colours can be important.
Colours
on animals, especially when it's not like a natural colour for that animal. So if you see a black fox or maybe a white snake, then that's going to be something significant.
Yeah.
So that's another way of thinking about animals. And also we think about the context. I mean, you said that at the top, and that's always very important.
Context is key.
And you may find with animals that there are a few other details in the dream which support you interpreting it in a certain direction rather than this direction or that direction. Like we had a dream from the last session from Carol Binadell, where it was a cow that was chewing. It had to do with chewing the cud, which is kind of a rumination, a thinking about.
They weren't eating the cows, and they were getting bloated.
But all the language. So there was. She talked about they weren't eating. They were fat, which could have been bloated. That the grass had been growing but hadn't been eaten down. So a lot of the things that she said in the dream about the grass and about the cows were about that aspect of a cow, about the digestive system. And so all of those details, and her son in the dream saying, I know you know how to fix these sick cows. So it was all to do, it seemed to be to do with the cows being unable to do a certain thing, which was ruminate over a thing. And so it kind of pushes you, all those details push you into that interpretation, rather than saying it's about something else. It's about provision, for instance, which a cow could also be about.
And Maria had spoken about cows producing milk.
Yeah.
It could be that, or it could be cows also produce meat.
Yeah.
The milk of the word.
And the meat of the word.
So think about the context, definitely. And think about as well, if you're dreaming about your own pet, it could be a pet issue. So if you're dreaming about your own pet, might have a completely different context as to dreaming about somebody else's pet. So that's always very interesting. Are you responsible for that pet? Do you look after them? And that has a different meaning then to it being somebody else's pet.
And if you have a natural affection for a certain kind of animal, if you own many of them, then that's going to affect how you dream about it as well.
Yeah, we have budgies, and I do dream about my budgies quite a bit.
Yeah.
I did last night dream about my budgies, actually. Yeah. So also think about where the creatures live. Are they night creatures or are they day creatures? Usually a night creature that hunts in the night may have a negative connotation. But say, for example, what if it's an owl? Owls can have more positive connotations, but obviously, once again, context is key.
Yeah, that's right. So those are good principles, and keep coming back to the principles of interpreting animals, because there are always new animals in dreams. As we were saying just at the beginning of this stream, that if you take an encyclopedia of animals, you know it's going to be an enormous book. So there's always going to be a new animal that you may come across when you're interpreting your own dreams or when you're interpreting other people's dreams. And there's a good chance, perhaps above any other category, that the animal you dream about will be one you don't find in a dream dictionary to kind of give you a helping hand on. And so be understanding how do I go about understanding what this might mean is actually quite important. I'd say it's more important with animals than it is kind of with many other categories of dream element.
Definitely. Well, an interesting thing as well is, and this is what I'd like to talk about, because we have giraffes on our notes, and for me, a giraffe is a different thing, obviously, to John, having lived in Africa for most of my life, and having been to the regions where we talk about where we see animals in the wild. What would a giraffe versus a lion versus and culturally, what that would mean to me versus what it would mean culturally to you if you've grown up in the UK. So you had a dream about giraffes once, didn't you? It was quite an interesting dream.
And yeah, I did, and it's also strange. In our previous session, we were talking about animals that don't exist, and how you decode those. And this is a dream about an animal that doesn't actually exist. It wasn't even an animal in a way. That the dream took place on a trail in the middle of a forest. There was nothing like bad about it. It was but it was like woods near where we live, but it wasn't those woods. And there were lots of paths through it, and I was trying to find my way out. And then there was a big like gravel road, and I kind of came out onto this gravel road and saw, as I was coming through the trees, I saw these three wooden giraffes. Only they didn't have any heads, but they were alive. So they were made of wood and they were alive, but they kind of stopped at the top of the neck. And they were a family, and they looked at me. That was it was clearly a father, a mother, and like a juvenile giraffe. And I only noticed them from their shape. They didn't have any giraffe type markings or anything else. They actually almost looked like wooden toys, but they were enormous. They were life size. And I looked at them and they looked at me, and then they kind of turned around and trotted back off into the forest and disappeared. And that was part of the dream. It was a longer dream, so I had more elements to work with when I kind of thought about, well, what does this mean? But that was my encounter with those wooden giraffes.
Well, what do you think they represented?
That's a good question, isn't it? Giraffes are defined really, I think this is kind of what I got to go on really. Giraffes are defined by their neck. So, but it's a spirit. It's kind of I felt it was a spiritual thing because of the highly symbolic nature of the dream element. So it was something that was able to turn my head. Very strong, powerful neck. Wood often relates to humanity and human ideas. So it was a human construct, and that's also borne out by the fact that it's not just something made of wood. Why was it made of wood and not metal? But the fact that it was almost like a human carved toy as well. So it was made out of wood, which represents humanity, but it was almost like somebody had carved it. I mean, God made a giraffe, but we just carve things that look like giraffes, right? When we make models of them. So both of those parts of it said that it was something to do with human ideas and a human construct, and that the long and powerful neck may have been a promise that it could have given me vision, because that's what a giraffe's neck does. It elevates it, but actually it couldn't because there was no head on top of it. So I felt it had to do with some very human ideas, which I kind of had like let go of at about that time when I had the dream, and stopped willing towards and like researching and trying to work out and figure out with my mind. And I just kind of let them go and said, okay, God, I'd rather get an understanding from you than figure it out myself. And so because of what was going on in my context at that time, that's kind of how I read that dream element.
Very interesting. So now, you know what I'd like to talk about, talking about cultural stuff with giraffes, but what I'd like to talk about is a very interesting cultural element of the stag.
Stag is an interesting, as a deer, but it's not just a deer, like a doe would be. So that's kind of, I always imagine that's a Song of Solomon type deer, right? Is the doe, it's the female, as the deer pants for the water. So why a stag and not a doe? Because the doe is the deer that pants for the water, but the stag is there's two ways I think you can read a stag if you've had one in your dream. Stags can often appear in the good. They're a bit like a lion, because as the lion represents the kind of the king of the plain, or the king of the jungle, as we would say, like think of the Lion King, right? As a cultural symbol. The stag in Northwestern Europe represents the same, but for the forest, and Northwestern Europe always was a forest environment. So it could be representing Jesus in that sense. And especially if you see a white stag, that could very well be an encounter with Jesus. But you need to be careful and think about, the feelings that went with this in the dream and what the stag was doing, because the negative meaning of the stag refers to a pagan god. And it's kind of a, excuse me, this pagan spirit that's called the horned god, which has antler horns. Cernunnos is his name here in the UK. But he's related to the pantheon of false gods. So you do have to be a bit careful. Is this a false god or is this a picture of Jesus? A bit as you have to be careful with a lion. Is this like threatening and fearful and hunting me down? Because that would be Peter talking about Satan, who goes around roaring, seeking whom he may devour, or is it the Lion of Judah? And similarly with a stag, you need to be discerning as to whether this is a picture of Jesus as the king of the forest environment, like the Lion of Judah, or whether it's actually a representation of a false god.
Very interesting. I remember talking about the bear as well. Is the bear also one of those symbols? I know that bears obviously have different meanings in different cultures. So if you're in Australia, a koala bear is different to a polar bear up north, and a grizzly bear in America, or for example, an animal that's a teddy bear. So if you dream about a teddy bear, it's going to be different. So what if I dream about a bear? What would I be dreaming about?
Bear's an interesting one because you can almost do a whole session on bears because there's so many of them, right? And we should talk about that. You've mentioned a few of them: a black bear, a grizzly bear, the cultural associations with a bear, like a bear with a sore head. We talk about being irritable as a cultural association. If it's a particularly bad-tempered bear, they can also be incredibly territorial. Don't get between a mother bear and its cub. It could be a sign that if you not to trespass on or come against somebody's ministry. Somebody's very sensitive about their ministry. They're going to like chop you into little bits because that's what a bear will do if it feels the thing it values is threatened, right? Polar bears, I didn't know this about polar bears, but they've actually got black skin and white fur. So it often can refer to kind of quite an aggressive religious spirit. And it could be a territorial religious spirit.
It's white on the outside, but it has black skin.
Black on the inside. Its identity actually would be black. We talk about a bear market in the financial realm. So, and that typically is a bear market is a downward trend,
rapid downward trend.
And there is also biblical precedent for a bear because there's Elisha's bear. When Elisha was going up to Bethel, and he was being mocked by a group of. Actually, it wasn't boys. It was more. The translation is more kind of young men. So it was like a whole big group of like probably late, not teenage, early 20-year-old men came and mocked him for his faith, and he just performed a miracle in their town as well because I think he unstopped the wells in Jericho, and that's where they thought they were from, and he pronounces a judgment on them, and these bears come and kills like 2/3 of these guys. It's like a profound judgment on mocking God's voice. And so there's a sense in which bears can often represent a judgment of some sort. And that can be like a human judgment coming against you. I'm not saying it represents necessarily God judging you, because that's not the way God judges us. He judges us with love and compassion.
But also bears can hibernate, so it could be an issue that is lying sleeping. So you've got to think about that's characteristic of the bear. If it's hibernating in your dreams, it means it's a powerful issue that's sleeping that might come back,
which is a good
to
point.
Bite you.
So if you see a bear that's is kind of either coming out of a burrow or going into one, and you see certain like first falls of snow and a bear going into like a burrow, then it could be this is the time to deal with this issue before it disappears and you can't see it anymore, and so it would be a warning then to address a certain thing. Context is going to be key with a bear, I think.
What about a teddy bear? Now you've spoken about and this is the thing I find interesting is if you see a toy representation of something, that's different then to the actual representation of the thing in your dream, because a teddy bear would represent something different, and a toy giraffe would represent something to a real giraffe.
Absolutely. I kind of feel like it does depend on who's having the dream. I mean, I sometimes think children dream about toys and toy representations, and that is a comfort. So sometimes dreaming about a toy, like especially a teddy bear, right, especially if it's your favorite teddy bear you had when you were a child, could represent a certain security or a comfort. And depending on where that had come from, maybe I mean, I have a bear that's kind of valuable. It's a bit of an antique, actually, and it came from my grandparents. So I've never dreamt about that, but if I did, I'd be thinking, well, it was very comforting to me. I loved that bear. So it's something comforting that I loved that's come from my grandparents, right? So I'd be then thinking about probably a positive inheritance that I have from a certain side of the family, right? That's how I'd be starting to think about a teddy bear. But toys, as you are asking the question, can also be to play at a thing. Like if you see a toy soldier, maybe you're only playing at warfare or spiritual warfare. You're playing around with the thing that it represents, right? So what does a bear represent? A bear represents judgment. If it's a toy bear, say somebody is holding a teddy bear and shaking it at you and looking angry, it could be that they're actually not really judging you. It's just they're playing around.
Very interesting. So bears, it's definitely, the context is really important. Now, let's talk about some more unclean animals, the ones we don't like so much: mice, rats, bats.
Do you want to start with one of these?
Well, I find it quite interesting because mice, I've not dreamt about mice or rats or bats, but my sense would be that they feed on garbage and they hide in dark places. They don't like to come out in the day. So as we were talking about creatures of darkness and creatures of night, they usually like to come out at night, especially rats. And rats can be absolutely huge. And they can be huge issues. And they're definitely unclean issues. They could be dreams. They could be, if you have a dream of a rat, they could be sinful issues that is providing food for rats. So if you dream of a rat in a wall, it's something hiding in the constructs of yourself in your house, and sinful issues that could be hiding there. Because you had an interesting dream once about a rat, and I quite like what you did with it in the dream. And that's always a thing that's interesting to talk about, is if you're in a dream, what do you do if you can consciously do something in a dream? What do you do? And what you do in the dream is quite important. So do you want to share that dream?
Yeah, I'm happy to share that dream. I dreamt I was in a house. It was an apartment. It was on about the 4th floor. It was a really, really swanky apartment. Very, very nice. This is the kind of apartment you want to live in, people. You know, it was a big dining room, long table, and like very high quality fittings on the stone floors and all sorts of stuff.
And if you want to understand what that means, go to our Dream Elements series on houses, because that we did do some stuff on what different elements mean in houses. Anyway, carry on.
So there was there was a rat in the wall, and I knew it was in the wall. And I was moving into this apartment, and I had to get the rat out of the wall. And I think I even like punched through the drywall and like it jumped out. I tried to grab hold of it by the scruff of the neck. I tried to grab it. It bit me on my finger, but it didn't draw blood and it didn't hurt.
Your left or right?
I think my right. And then I grabbed it again by the scruff of the neck. And I basically I got hold of it, took it. It was a big rat, and it was about this big. And I took it down the stairs, outside the bottom of the apartment building, and and then I lobbed it over the fence of the apartment, which was electrified. Now, electrified fence is something you kind of find in South Africa more than you do anywhere else. Like that, I've been, like in America, it's not so common, and in Europe, it's not so common. But it is much more common in South Africa. So this was a chain link fence, which had it was electrified itself, and it had electric wires on the top. And the rat was then sat on top of garbage bins, like the plastic wheelie bins, and it was kind of looking back at me, but it knew it couldn't get in because of the electrified fence which was between us. I then went and there was a cafe in the bottom area of the apartment. You know, like some apartment buildings have gymnasiums and cafes in the bottom. This was one of those. And so I sat down with 3 or 4 other men and drank espressos with them, and that's where my dream ended. That's a good dream.
Did you see the men's faces? Do you remember their faces?
No.
Do you think they're angelic?
I do.
Brilliant. And one of the things for us about dreaming about espressos is we feel it's for us actually God speaking about the preparation of revelation and strong revelation when we dream about espressos, not espressos, espresso.
Espressi, that's it.
So a very interesting dream.
That's the dream, but just to kind of run through the elements of that dream, the apartment is a kind of a sense of self, but it's something that I'm moving into. So if you're moving into a building, and this is going to be your own, then what the building says is talking about the kind of identity in that area of your life, whatever that area is, that you're moving into. And this is a good thing because it's a really nice apartment and it's got a good view because it's high up. But the bad thing is that there's a rat in the walls. Now, in the walls that's an interesting metaphor because walls are often divisions between spaces. They divide spaces up, and similarly in our the way we are in our minds, we have certain beliefs about things, which mean we see one thing as something as right and something else as wrong. And so something being in the walls is it's hiding behind an assumption that I've made about a thing. And it's not necessarily a biblical revelation or a piece of theology, but it may well be a conclusion I've come to based on my experience. But I know that there's something in there that shouldn't be. So I've gone and got this thing out. As I've done it, I've tried to deal with this issue pull it by the scruff of the neck. So that's really get to grips with it. I'm like, no, this thing's going out. I'm not being namby-pamby. I'm not scared of it. I'm going to deal with it because I know it's important. It's bitten me on the finger, which is the pointy finger that's the prophetic finger on my right hand. So it's a prophetic sense, but it's come out of faith and strength rather than born and called. So it's probably to do with something God's been speaking to me about in my own life rather than something I've been called to do. And so it's kind of a more personal issue. But it hasn't drawn blood. I've got no life escaping and I'm not experiencing pain because of it, even though it kind of has stung me. So that probably means, oh man, it's just like, yeah, you're right about that, God. It does hurt a little bit, but I'd rather see that this is a thing, understand it and get rid of it than get into a cycle of feeling bad about it, right? And then I've thrown it out and over another boundary, a chain link fence, which is electrified. And that is a Holy Spirit, the energy, electricity, power. Electricity is how we power so much of our world. That is often a signal of the Holy Spirit, but the Holy Spirit as power
and a boundary,
and especially in this
case,
a full boundary. So a Holy Spirit enforced boundary, which is keeping this thing out. And then, as you said, what I do after that is sit down with probably spiritual entities and actually enjoy a revelation. And because that's how, as you said, I agree, the stimulant effect of strong coffee is an analogy for the stimulant effect of something God reveals to you. So just like in the natural, you drink like a strong coffee and you go bing. When God reveals something to you and it's him speaking, you do the same thing, you go bing. But in the spiritual sense, that's why we read it that way.
But that's interesting because we deal with mice and rats, but bats in a way are similar but not quite the same, because they have wings, but they're also blind. So they only fly by sonar. They don't fly by actual sight. So they feel like also an unclean spiritual being, but that have no real spiritual sense or ability to see. What would you, and interestingly, Maria had sent us a dream where she said she dreamt about a whole swarm of bats that she saw coming like an attack in front of workers who repaired a road. So what would you say bats would be, and what, in the context of that dream, what would they be?
I think you're definitely hitting the right ways to think about this. I mean, you think about the criteria. I haven't come across too many bat dreams. So it goes back to the principles. How do you understand it? Go back to your first principles, right? It's a creature that lives in a cave, right? Which is a dark recess. It lives in a dark recess. It hunts at night. It kind of comes out at night.
It's very disease infested as well. A lot of the viruses we're experiencing come from
the Spanish flu, COVID-19 are all wherever they came into the, I'm not talking about how they came into the human
No.
population, but their point of origin was in the bat population. So they're like rats in that sense. They carry like harmful diseases if those diseases cross the barrier into the human population. So a lot of these, and then you've got the cultural associations. Spiders are associated with Halloween, and so are bats. If you go around where, around the Halloween time of year now, if you wander around your streets and you see the kind of stuff that gets put up, it's spiders, ghouls, bats, and the association with vampires and vampire bats. So all of those things are quite negative associations, and it's an unclean animal, right? In scripture, you would not be supposed to eat a bat. So all of those things are quite negative, and I can't really think of many positive things about bats, but there's often an exception, so maybe there would be one day. So interestingly, how would you interpret Maria's dream? I'll read it. I have dreamt about a whole swarm of bats that I saw coming like an attack in front of workers who repaired a road.
Well, a swarm of bats feels like a large spiritual attack of some sort coming to work. I mean, a road is the thing that you drive your vehicle along, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I wondered if she'd had this, when she'd had this, and in what context she'd had it, because context is quite important. So what the context around the dream was, but it feels like it's people who are repairing a road, to obviously it's where people would steer their vehicles along. But these bats have come as a spiritual attack, it feels like, against the workers who are trying to repair this road. And it feels like a spiritual attack of sorts that have come against possibly people in the church.
I really do agree with that, and I've got a bit of a leg up on this one because it was one of the first dreams I interpreted of Francine Hayes's. And what made it so interesting was she dreamt about roadworks, and that is for me, that's also quite an uncommon dream element. So I kind of really asked, okay, God, what's going on here? And it just kind of got me to think about it logically. So if you think about you are the dreamer, you're in a car. Your car represents your vehicle, which can be sort of a ministry. So let's just think about it in terms of a ministry. So your vehicle is your ministry. It takes you from one place to another, which helps if it's in the church, say you have a sort of a leadership ministry within a church, then if you're driving that car along the road, then you're fulfilling that function and the church is going somewhere and your ministry is going somewhere. Now, your car could break down, which would be your actual role, or the thing that you're doing is having problems. But if the road itself is not right, that's something different. And that would be something to do with a legacy issue to do with the church, or to do with like theology, where there's whack theology, which affects the whole church. So the road is more to do with the environment on which that vehicle travels. And to be a worker on the road, it's almost to be like an apostle, or somebody in leadership, or someone who's helping the church environment become strong. And so that's what I would say it's about, because I think that's what road works signify. We know from Francine, she was dealing with really difficult issues which were to do with her whole church, but not all the people in the church. It was like the structure of the church and where it went, and there were legacy issues and relational issues with the denomination. It was a difficult thing, right? So
yeah, very interesting dream
very
element.
Interesting dream.
And then the thing I wanted to talk about was, because we've actually experienced this. Our son dreamed several years ago when he was under quite a strong attack from someone else with scorpions, and it was quite an interesting dream, because if you think about Psalm 91, it says, "You will tread upon serpents and scorpions and all the powers of the enemy." And so
if I recount that dream, and then if I'm missing anything, you must tell me. Okay?
Yes.
So he had a dream that he was in his bedroom, and every time he went down to sleep, scorpions would come out from underneath his bed, and would try and attack him. He called you, And then you came in and like you bashed the heck out of those scorpions, I think with a pair of shoes, or you stood
Well,
stamped on them or did something.
he
Now, is
said
that
in the
right?
dream, I took the whole thing out from under his bed. I went in and rooted out all the scorpions, and I then proceeded to violently kill them. So and take care of it. But in a sense, I think it was God, was the Holy Spirit, bringing to the surface something that had been attacking him quite badly. And I think possibly as a mum, I was playing a role as well as the Holy Spirit. Both of us were kind of playing this role. The Holy Spirit was bringing, revealing, and powerfully eliminating these. But in a sense, he was showing me as the mum, as his mum, how to do this. So what would a scorpion be then in this? It's like that thing that stings you, because they have stingers, don't they? And they can also, they're weird, because remember that time we found a scorpion. We were trying to lay grass in South Africa, and there was a scorpion, and it looked like the grass, and you can't even tell sometimes when they're there, because they kind of mimic the grass. So there's something that's very dangerous. It can kill you, because their stings are like venomous, and they can actually cause a lot of damage.
Yeah. So yeah, again, think about the checklist. It's an unclean animal. They're hunters. They're toxic. They sting. They often affect your feet. So, and it's interesting in this dream they were under the bed, because that's to do with intimacy and rest.
So his place of rest.
In his place of rest, there was this toxic thing that was really well, the threat was that it would sting him, right?
And it was a demonic attack, I feel, on him from somebody else.
Yeah. And so it often speaks to those kind of things. So it's often it's an attack which really stings, it really hurts. But I kind of feel like with scorpions it comes through people. It's different from spiders. Why a scorpion and not a spider? It's not a bite. It's not a self-will issue, which spiders often represent. But it often can be a damage done, but it's a perpetuating thing. And there's that spiritual element of it, which it's not just come from the person. It's come like with a spiritual intent.
A sting in the tail.
A sting in the tail. That's right.
So very interesting, scorpions. Do you want to talk about elephants?
Elephants. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Let's talk about elephants.
Let's talk about the elephant in the room.
That I don't know why, but we seem to have had a dream or two where that phrase, the elephant in the room, is it helps to unlock the meaning of that dream. And typically it would be a dream where a number of characters are in a room and something's happening, and there's just an elephant in the room, and maybe that elephant is just like lying down sleeping or dead or who knows what it is, but it's just present. And that is the definition of the elephant in the room, which is the issue everybody knows is there but not talking about. So if that's what you're seeing in your dream with an elephant in it, then I would be thinking, who's there, which people are there, and what is the issue that they're not talking about, because that's what this dream is talking about.
Well, in this dream, I'd interpreted a dream where it was a tiny little elephant in the room, and it was within a family context, and they kept shocking the elephant, and as they kept shocking the elephant, it became bigger and bigger. And I'm not saying the identity of the person, but the elephant had got bigger because of some emotional stuff that was going on in the family.
Shocks. Right.
There
so
was
it's a word play, isn't it? It was an electric shock in the dream, but it was just like a shock from the experience of a certain thing in real life.
And there were anger issues in the family that had not been dealt with, and it was the elephant in the room. And as the scene progressed and the elephant kept getting shocked, it kept getting bigger. So the small issue became a big issue, and nobody was talking about it. And I think I was able to really unlock that for this person and help them understand it. So what other things could elephants mean, though? Because they're not always bad. Elephants are actually incredibly sociable, loving, communal animals. And so in a context of them being in the forest or in the African savannah, maybe they don't necessarily have a negative connotation.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, you're hitting some of the marks right there when you're talking about, again, back to first principles. How do we think about these things? Well, what do elephants do and how do they behave? They're very big. They're very protective, especially over their young. Maybe that's part of what your dream with an elephant is about. Is it about a mother elephant and her young? And is it talking about being protective over baby Christians, or people who are new to the faith?
What about an elephant never forgets?
There's another cultural association
about that one?
Right? So elephants and long memory. It could be living out of past issues, either good or bad. Again, context of the dream will help to tell you. And it could even be a move of God, because when an elephant starts to walk, everybody feels it. So if it's a thump, 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 and the ground is shaking, then maybe God's on the move, but in a very powerful and heavy way. And there's not much that can stop an elephant once it decides to move, and especially to charge. I mean, we know that from Africa and being around the cultures in which there are elephants. If an elephant starts to charge, there's nothing in nature that even non-natural things like safari jeeps will drive away from a charging elephant.
Yeah. And especially if they put their ears out, which is also an interesting dream element. If they put their ears out, that means they're possibly going to charge you.
Yeah.
So very interesting. Elephants.
Okay, let's move on to sheep and goats. This is an interesting one. You had a dream about this.
Yes,
didn't you?
I had a really interesting dream about sheep and dogs, actually, which we dealt with in the first video. So I was helping a farmer in the stream to help get his sheep and dogs into a field. You can interpret it for me, but we had gone to drop the sheep off in a certain field, but there was a barrier. Somebody had put a human barrier up to us getting them into this field. So I had to follow the farmer, and we opened the back of the bucky, or the
pickup truck, right?
What do you call it? A ute.
A ute, yeah.
In Australia, or a pickup truck. And we were able to throw these sheep, or not throw them, let them jump into a fast-flowing river. And by going into the river and then back up out, they could go up into this field. But I had to look down to the river, because we were on a bridge, and I had to go, a bridge, that's also a good dream element. And say, are you guys okay? And make sure they were getting into the field. But it was interesting, because there were these dogs who looked like they weren't sheep dogs. It was like my cousin's, what dog is that? It's those big, thick, heavy dogs, not
like a bull terrier.
Like yes, not anyway, I can't remember the type of dog. I apologize. But they were the one was a very thick dog, and he jumped in, and he looked like he was sinking to the bottom. And I was like, oh my gosh, is he going to be okay? And then he popped up, and then he kind of went along the river, and then they all came out into this field, and so everybody was okay. So yes, would you like to have a go at that one?
Well, one of the key metaphors with sheep is Jesus is the good shepherd, and we're the sheep. So sheep often relate to believers.
My
right?
sheep hear my voice.
And my sheep hear my voice. It's a very deeply scriptural metaphor. David as a shepherd, so it's very well established through the Old Testament and the New Testament as a metaphor for believers. And so that's where I would start thinking about it, and especially when it comes to moving sheep. So in this dream, and it's interesting because for some reason you can't just move the sheep straight into the field. I mean, and a field it's an enclosed place, but it's also, so that means it's a place of safety, especially for sheep. It's a place of feeding, and it's a place of rest. So whatever this dream is about, and a field can be a field, like what field are you in? I'm a dream interpreter. That's the field that we're in.
The field of dream interpretation.
The field of dream interpretation. So I had the sense that that's what this was about. It was about we were going to help believers get into dream interpretation as a field, but it was by a bit of an unconventional route.
And the river would be the flow of the spirit. You have to jump into the flow of the spirit to get into the field. But there'd been a human blockage. Somebody had put up a human barrier so that it was difficult for these sheep to directly get in. in the dream.
And that could, and what could that be? That, I mean, that could be just a kind of a lack of knowledge or teaching or access, or even a lack of people to be able to speak directly and encourage and coach and mentor in that, to get into that field. Because you can learn so much from books and YouTube videos, but sometimes you need community and you need help. And so I felt that that's maybe what that was speaking to.
Yeah, it was a good dream. And so then how would a sheep be different to a goat? If you dream about a goat, not a sheep. Goat's butt?
Yeah, goat's butt, yeah. Well, again, if go back to the Bible, there Jesus talks about separating the sheep from the goats, right? And that's quite a specific, I always felt that was quite a specific metaphor. It's not talking about saved and unsaved people, but it's talking about people who are in covenant and responsive, the sheep, and people who are in covenant but non-responsive, the goats. And so that would be people who say, I know God, but really they don't. And also often there's kind of a religious stubbornness that I think is represented by a goat, but not always, because you think about Jacob and Laban, and goats there represent wealth. So
yes, because Jacob took the, certainly he had this thing where he knew which goats. He had a dream actually about goats, didn't
right,
he?
he did.
And in the dream, the goats that were marked were the goats that he offered to keep, and it did increase his wealth, and he was then able to leave Laban. Yeah. So even Jacob's had a dream about a goat.
So in that sense, there's a prophetic element about goats as well, because it's to do with God communicating through dreams and taking the thing that is sometimes countercultural, because the single-coloured goats in that culture would be seen as more pure than the speckled ones. But I think science has discovered that it's a genetic advantage to be speckled. It makes them hardier and better able to breed, and so he increased his wealth by taking the thing that was countercultural. So there may be if you're seeing something in with a goat in that way that makes you think about that Bible story, it could have something to do with that.
Very interesting, and very interesting as far as understanding the difference in nuances of dreams and the context of dreams. Like we always harp on it, context is key.
That's right. It's going to depend on the sheep and the goats and what they're doing. Okay, so let's move on to frogs. What do you think about a frog? Have you ever had a frog in a dream?
No.
I don't think I have either.
But I don't think it's good. I just remember the thing that it brought to mind for me was that interesting book we read by Howard Pittman. And it was interesting because God had taken him up to heaven and spoken to him about the church. And he wrote it in a book called Placebo. And then he'd also written Demons, an Eyewitness Account. And actually one of the earthbound demonic entities had appeared as a frog. And so it was to do with lust, really.
Yeah, it was.
And yeah, well, it's definitely an interesting book to read. Demons, an Eyewitness Account by Howard Pittman.
Yes.
So that was and it's on Kindle. So if you it is interesting and helps you understand the hierarchy with amongst spiritual entities, and he'd actually physically seen them and understood how certain of the things worked. So what would you say?
Yeah, I don't think it's not a great dream symbol. By and large, they are unclean animals, so you're not allowed to partake of them. They feed off flies, and from the part one we talked about flies.
Lord of the Flies
being like Beelzebul, which is the enemy, but also that flies is, you take the first letter off, its lies, and the enemy is the father of all lies. So it feeds off deception, that spirit. So unless there's a very specific meaning to it, like maybe a child who dreams of Kermit the Frog and they like the Muppets, that wouldn't necessarily be a terrible thing. But if it's an actual frog that you're dreaming about, then I would be quite careful about that. Although interestingly, I don't know how much it happens anymore, but they're like certain cultures eat frogs, and so I wouldn't, but that may have a different cultural meaning in their culture. So you've got to think about things like that, and not just I can't just think from a Western culture,
No.
but because I am in a Western culture, I interpret it that way. But in other cultures, it may be different.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So, what I want to talk a little bit about are some wild dogs, because we did deal with dogs in the very first understanding your dreams element on
Yeah.
animals. We dealt with dogs as pets. But what I would be interested to deal with is like things like wolves, foxes, and hyenas, and those kind of dogs, like wild dogs.
Yeah.
And especially wolves, because wolves are spoken about as false teachers or false prophets.
Yeah.
They maybe look like your friends,
Yeah.
but they're not your friends. They're actually wild dogs, and they prey on weak sheep,
Yeah.
so that they can feed themselves. So it's an interesting dream element, wolves, and what that could mean if you have a dream about a wolf.
They hunt in packs. They prey on the weak, like many predators, apex predators prey on the weak. And the Bible also talks about that, false teachers and false prophets preying on widows, trying to con them out of all their money. And we also talk about being like raised with wolves, which means that somebody would be raised in a very kind of wild environment. If someone's like, oh yeah, they're raised with wolves, then that kind of means that they have got a lot of humanistic desires. So in general, wolves are not a good not a good symbol. And just the fact that sort of they were picked up by the Nazis, they like to call themselves wolves, was also because they had that hunting. The SS would refer to themselves as like the wolf pack. It's not a great association. There's vicious, savage pack hunters.
And probably teachings based in the demonic.
And maybe humanistic thinking and fleshly desires. Yeah.
Very interesting. And so little foxes, I mean, we think about foxes, they look very cute, and they've actually become quite popular, it seems, in current culture in the UK.
Yeah.
But the Bible in Song of Solomon talks about the little foxes that spoil the vines, and these are the little things that destroy our intimacy with Jesus. And I find if you read Song of Solomon in the Passion Translation, there's some beautiful imagery and a lot of prophetic symbolism, and he expounds it so beautifully, just the different things. But the foxes are those things that Jesus speaks about, and he says in Song of Solomon, in the Passion Translation, he says, help me catch the little, could you catch the little foxes that spoil our intimacy? And then he says, we'll do it together, which is that sense of him being able to help you see those issues. But they're sometimes very difficult to discern, aren't they? Because it's sly as a fox.
And yeah, that's right. So if you think about foxes in the natural, they're often associated with being very sly and very cunning. And they're often also associated with being quite wanton. A fox will go into a chicken coop, kill all the chickens, not to eat it because it needs to be fed, but just because it quite likes killing stuff. And then it just disappears, leaving no chickens left. So that's also a negative connotation with foxes.
And yeah.
And they're scavengers. And an urban fox, because they're primarily urban in our culture now, they most often live off garbage, which is a bit like a rat, really. It feeds off garbage.
I've heard of foxes getting into chicken coops and actually budgie aviaries and just killing them, just for the sport of killing the birds.
Yeah.
Not because they're hungry, but because they're wanton.
Yeah. Last dog element was hyenas. We had a dream about a hyena a little while back, didn't we? What do you think about hyenas?
Well, obviously, you could think of the first thing as a laughing hyena. You think about that movie with the lion,
the Lion King. You mean
the Lion King, and the hyenas laughing and mocking, and they're pack hunters. Do you remember the dream of the hyena? I'd be interested to remember what it was.
I actually don't. Unfortunately, I don't have it in front of me. I didn't put it in, but I do remember it's a savage mockery, which is designed to and packs, as like you said, they hunt in packs, right? So it may be that there's a group of 3, 4, 5, 6 people, who bring a spirit of mockery against the dreamer or the person if they're being threatened by hyenas in their dream, or that's kind of the message of the dream. But they're, as dogs, they're also they're scavengers. They feed off death, and their bite has an incredible pressure. And so there's the words will create, the words of the mockery are designed to create pressure and clamp down and stop you from moving or being free of it.
Very interesting.
So what would you do? What would you do about that? I guess that's if you had a dream and you felt that somebody was being attacked by hyenas.
I don't actually know.
I think if it was somebody else, I'd be thinking about praying for them, as always. And also, if you do know who it is and what the mockery is about, praying to cut and even speaking out against the message of the mockery.
Definitely a good idea. And so one of the things I'd like to talk about, and this is an interesting one because an octopus is quite a and I had dreamt about a stinging jellyfish within the context of a spiritual atmosphere. So I suppose they're different but similar in a sense. What would an octopus be?
Oh, that's an interesting kind of why this and not that. And you think about the many tentacles of a jellyfish. The design behind that is to, once you get entrapped in it, which you have to float into or swim into because jellyfish don't move, then you get tangled up in it. But an octopus is different. An octopus is active with all of its arms. Many arms can go in many different directions and manipulate multiple different things at any one time. You think also about what else an octopus does is when it's threatened, it squirts out a smoke screen. And so it's a spiritual thing because it's an underwater dweller. They don't typically deal this exist, or they're not able to exist outside of the water. So it's a spiritual thing, but it's a very manipulative spirit, and it may have its manipulations on many different things at once. But when you kind of get near to it and try and put your finger on it, it puts a smoke screen up. So there'll be lots of words and excuses and lies and a lot of subterfuge, which is designed to create a smoke screen so you can't actually pin it down to anything. And it makes it very difficult to deal with if you are dealing with somebody who is like that, or a spirit which kind of comes against you in that way through one or more people. It's tough. It's a very difficult dream element, but very rarely positive.
Yeah. But I mean, I've not ever dreamt about an octopus, but I have, within the context of a church, dreamt of stinging jellyfish in their atmosphere, that it was actually floating up in the church atmosphere, along with snakes and various other things. And so
that's bad.
it was just God trying to reassure me that I'd seen a thing spiritually, I'd sensed and discerned a thing in the spirit. Do you want to talk about monkeys and baboons, and then we shall conclude this very long talk about animals,
and there's still more we haven't covered.
Yes.
Monkeys, just thinking about cultural associations, monkeys usually negative. They often pop up in stories and literature as being very mischievous. So mischievous, mocking. You think about that phrase, it's the monkey on my back, which talks about a compulsion or an addiction which is very difficult to deal with. And most monkeys are very territorial. We have experience with baboons from living in Cape Town, and you don't want to get in the way of a baboon when it's on its territory. They're quite fiercely territorial, and even though they're not very big, they're incredibly powerful. I mean, baboons and even monkeys are. You can read the stories of where people have kept monkeys thinking they're safe for 10 or 15 years, but if the monkey decides it for whatever reason, it's an animal, right? So in the natural, it is an animal, and it can turn, and when it does, those people are left with like terrible injuries. So they can be very, very powerful.
I'd had a vision of monkeys that were causing trouble, and for me they were demonic entities, that mischievous demonic entities that were causing trouble amongst the congregation of a church as well, where they were there was a lot of gossip and backbiting and stuff happening, and I could see these demonic entities as monkeys in the spirit realm. Although I've never dreamt about monkeys, that's what I saw in the sense of the context of that vision that I'd had many years back.
Mischief, power plays, tricks, all stuff that kind of comes against harmony and unity.
And they are very they're like focused very much on their group. So if you have a group of monkeys, capuchin monkeys there, and you've got another group, there's always a fight for territory and a fight for food and that kind of thing.
Rivalries, right?
Rivalries.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that is, as we say, a wrap. And thank you so much for listening to our not live stream, but our pre-recorded live stream.
Our not live stream, I like that.
Our not live stream. But we thought it would be good to conclude animals, because if you had a dream about any of these, also needless to say, like there's the streams app has a lot of stuff on animals. John Thomas is fantastic. He covers so much stuff. You can find some of the material in Bill and Thompson. So there's a lot of material out there. Just remember, context is key, and think about the animal, what it's doing, and is it a clean or an unclean animal.
Think about all of those principles. With animals, you're always going to come across animals that you can't find a definition for in resources, and you're going to find one that you haven't come across before, so you're going to need to figure it out. So always go back to those principles of, what does the Bible say about it? Is it clean? Is it unclean? Does it in the light? Is it in the dark? Is it what's its size? Where is it in the ecosystem? What's its defining features? What cultural associations are there to this animal? And maybe it's a word play, like somebody's being sharky, or squirrely, or a dream is telling you this thing is sealed, you know, because it's a seal. So can always be a wordplay element to any dream element, actually. Well,
thanks so much everyone for sticking the distance with us on this 3 long sessions, and we hope that these sessions have helped you, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks so much, guys. See you soon.
Bye.